Good morning.
Nobody's seen from her for a long time.
It's nice to see you all here. I'm Karen Cloyd, for those of you who don't know me. I am one of the co-chairs of West County Democrats. My co-chair is Suzanne Couch. Would you care to say good morning?
Good morning.
We're very glad you're here with us. I purposely did not turn on the Supreme Court hearings because I didn't want to get upset and then try to speak coherently to people. So I'm blissfully unaware of what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now. I am sure this is, again, like preaching to the choir, but I'm sure you all have a plan to vote. You may have already voted. You may be in process of voting. Whatever, just make sure it gets done before 7 p.m. on Tuesday, November 3rd. And again, preaching to the choir, if you have any resources that you can share with candidates of your choosing, or time that you can share trying to flip seats or keep seats in the blue column, we would greatly appreciate it. And I hope you're doing what is necessary to remain safe and healthy, because that's essential. Because we live out here where people run around with masks because they don't believe in science, which is extremely concerning. The September minutes were distributed electronically. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Okay. Do I have a motion to approve them?
I so move.
Okay, we have a motion.
Early.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Sandra. Okay. Those are approved. Okay, I'm not sure what that means. Alrighty, moving right along. The membership report. By the way, this is October. You know what comes in October besides, you know, Halloween. It's time for you to find your checkbook, but I will let Gay continue with the membership report.
Thank you very much. We currently have 103 paid members. As was stated, we are now starting to begin collecting dues for 2021, and the dues will be $20 a year. Because of the pandemic, we were asking people to mail in the dues, and I'll give you the mail address now. It's West County Dems, P.O. Box 31034, St. Louis, Missouri 63131. But we will have it up on the front page of the website probably within the day. And again, you know, it's a little bit different this year because of the pandemic. So I know everyone's a little stressed, but if you take some time and rejoin, we would really appreciate it because we're going to need it. Thank you.
So if you can do that, the sooner the better. We will have, as we've done in the past, an opportunity for those of you who pay your dues. I'm just making up stuff as I go along. If you pay your dues before the December meeting, which is on December 14th, when the country will be working towards righting itself as a ship, if you can get your dues in by December 14th by mail to the post office box that you will be able to find on the website, and you will be in a raffle drawing for a gift card to Pasta House. If you're not inclined to eat in a restaurant, you can always, you know, carry out. So that is something to consider.
Someone asked me to repeat the P.O. Box, if I could do that again.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
West County Democrats, P.O. Box 31034, St. Louis, Missouri 63131.
Next, it's hard to monitor the chat box and read your agenda. Next, we have the treasurer's report. Jan?
Hello.
Hi. Is there a question? Okay. As of
Yeah.
Is everything working?
Yeah. I'm over here.
ringing sound.
That was nothing.
Okay, the September Treasurer's Report. On August 31st, we had a balance of $6,466.73. Our revenue for the month was $20 in membership dues. And our disbursements were $861.25. $11.25 of that were fees, and then $750 was for donations that was approved of by the membership last month,
We're always so dark.
leaving us a balance on September 30th of $5,625.48.
Does that help?
So some, yeah.
Any questions?
Could I just say something? Some of you are muted and think you're talking, and some of you might be having a background conversation, and if that happens, you should mute so that the rest of the people are not distracted, please.
You need to read.
And you could go on the chat and
And so if you could check to see if you are muted.
Just let me sit it here.
up, see,
Okay.
then they can see you.
Okay.
Mark, can we get some assistance with that, please? Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Next is the program report.
Okay. Well,
Elaine?
thank you so much. I am so pleased to see so many of you here. I must start on a sad note, however. Some of you may remember we had to cancel a meeting when Dave Robertson, who was our guest speaker from UMSL, who was head of the poli-sci department up there and a consultant to many news and TV media stations and a treasurer to the St. Louis area and so on, was in the hospital. He seemed to recover from a heart procedure. They moved to Arizona, and I was devastated yesterday morning to open the Post-Dispatch, and on page A9, in case you have the Post-Dispatch, his obituary is there. Shortly after they reached Arizona, where they were going to be living near his son and son's family, he was diagnosed with end-stage pancreatic cancer, and I had only spoken to him a few weeks ago. I was just devastated. And so we have his last prepared professional program that he actually, in between the heart condition and the pancreatic, created for us, and Mark has preserved it, and we will be, and it is available because he went ahead and honored his commitment during selling a house, moving, having health issues and all, and that's the kind of man Dave Robertson was. Dr. Terry Jones is his colleague for many, many years, and they were very close friends. He, of course, is quite sad. He was interviewed and gave much of the information for the Post-Dispatch, and he is, by chance, our speaker in November on the Monday after the first Tuesday election, for which we all must be hoping, praying, donating money, donating time, and everything else, as you can imagine. This morning, we have Tony Messenger, and I will defer to that until it's time for him to come on board. He'll be speaking to us and Zooming from his house in Wildwood, and had another interesting column in this morning's Post-Dispatch as well. And I would like to get a little blurb in. Media is very important, but there is nothing like a local newspaper for investigative reporting, in depth, and so on. And I really hope that some of you will think, I know you donate to candidates, but I really hope that you will consider subscribing to the Post-Dispatch, even though it has become expensive, because it is a voice for our community, and they are supporting a number of fine columnists and people like Tony, who of course has won a Pulitzer. So think about that. You could think of the Post-Dispatch as being a donation to a lot of democratic processes. So anyway, I hope you will consider that, and I'll turn it back over to Karen.
Okay, thank you for that. Did you mention who our November speaker is?
Yes, I did.
Okay, all right. I wanted people to be apprised of that.
Yes.
Hopefully we will have good news then.
Because Dr. Terry Jones is emeritus, but he is still at UMSL and is very much excited about speaking to us, and I will be talking to him about other in-depth people that he would recommend who might also help us when we are concerned about where we'll be after that. Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Legislative report. Glenn, would you care to share anything with us of good news or bad news or mediocre news or?
The good news is so little has happened of substance that I didn't even bother producing a written report for the first time in like 3 years.
Ooh.
The House and the Senate in Washington, they're there, but they're not getting anything accomplished. As you know, the Senate Republicans, at least a few of them, are standing in the way of a second round or third round of pandemic response. As a result, the Democrats in the House are sitting there waiting for the Senate to tell them what they'll agree to. And if you've been following the news over the weekend, Nancy Pelosi has been politely saying no to efforts by the White House and a few Republicans, instead of doing one master recovery bill, to do a series of piecemeal things like a little bit for the airlines here, a check for all of us there. She's holding out for a generalized, broad-based bill, which is probably the best thing. The bad news is the U.S. deficit has gotten to the point where the deficit is dwarfing the U.S. economy. Because of the trillions of dollars we've put on our credit card for the pandemic response, on top of the $1 trillion this fiscal year, the Trump administration put us in the red. Remember, it used to be Republicans claimed to be the government of, the part of the government that was interested in balanced budgets and fiscal responsibility. That doesn't happen anymore. The good news is that Congress won't be doing much until after the election. The bad news is a lot of people are expecting that the Democrats will retake the Senate. What that means is you're going to have a number of lame duck to push through more judicial appointments and other things that the Democrats won't tolerate in that period between November 3rd and January 1st. In the state of Missouri, we had a special session that wasn't really so special. They spent a lot of time and energy getting almost nothing done. Probably in this part of the state, the most interesting thing they did was the governor went and did a 3-year moratorium on the St. Louis City Police Department's residency requirement. So in other words, even if voters in the city of St. Louis decide they want to keep the residency requirement, it'll be gone for 3 years. Or if voters decide they don't want the residency requirement, the state's just wasted a lot of money trying to overrule the will of the voters. The state of Missouri had a very good July, August, and early September because of the fact they postponed the tax season deadline from early or mid-April to July. What that meant was that the last fiscal year, which ended June 30th, really looked horrible. The good news is a lot of money from last fiscal year actually got paid to the state during this fiscal year. And so the state is temporarily on paper looking pretty good, but that's not the reality. The reality is state revenue is still suspect, especially for later in the year. Individual income tax and corporate income tax receipts year to date, in other words, July 1st through now, is higher than normal because of that money from last year pushed into this year. The bad news is sales tax revenue, Missouri's second highest place for general revenue income, is only up 0.7%. In other words, sales tax income for Missouri is tracking about 1/3 the rate of inflation right now, which means Missouri probably is going to see some really rough times late in this fiscal year. It appears to be the governor is hoping that he can put off any cuts or any adjustments until after January. The governor actually withdrew some of the withholds, letting some of the government agencies spend a little bit more money. That might look good and make people feel good, but the underlying weakness in the Missouri economy is still there. The other thing is, Missouri has been very slow to take steps to help people who are on long-term unemployment. Remember, we do not have a very generous unemployment system, and a lot of those who were laid off due to the pandemic in March and April are now timing out of their benefits. So in the next few months, we're going to see a lot of people, unless there's more help from Washington, who have absolutely no income because the jobs aren't coming back. And I really don't think a lot of these jobs are going to come back. One other little thing. Over the weekend, it was reported that Missouri had 5,000 new COVID cases in one day. Almost immediately after that, the state health department, which issued that number, said the number was wrong, that it was basically a reporting error, or as they put it, their computers, when they were putting things together, they didn't properly add the numbers. However, they've yet to produce accurate numbers. That 5,000 number is important because it's the highest single day total. And it tracks with things many of us are hearing from people around the state. And that is COVID is running wild in many rural parts of Missouri. And as you saw in the Post-Dispatch, one of the hot spots is down in the Boot Hill, where they've been losing hospitals due to the cuts primarily to Medicaid. So these things we do now can have implications later on. Cutting Medicaid spending caused hospitals to close. Hospitals close, then you get a pandemic, and it's a really bad situation. Any questions?
We have one that popped up in the chat box. You froze there a little bit. Regarding what you said about hoping that the Dems manage to take the Senate. Mm-hmm. The time period between election day and when they take office and inauguration, what kinds of trouble do you suppose they could stir up? You mentioned judicial appointments. Anything else?
The judicial appointments and maybe some appointments to boards and commissions are about all the Senate can do without the help of the House. They can't pass any real legislation without the consent of the House, and the House being Democratic and Pelosi being very aware of what the Republicans might try to sneak in. The only place the Senate has sole power is on judicial appointments, and I wouldn't be surprised if they try to ram through 50 or 100 federal judges during that dead zone. The good news is the dead zone for the Senate ends about the 2nd of January, their first working day in January, when new senators are sworn in. That's before the presidential inauguration by a couple weeks.
Harry, did you have a question?
Yes. Would you talk a little bit about the county council and their actions on these bills, 220, 222, and 223 about COVID response?
There's been a lot of unhappiness among both Democrats and Republicans on the council as to how Dr. Sam Page has been running the virus response. The good news is that the council is finally paying attention. Remember, in the first days of the pandemic, it seemed like nobody on the council wanted to take a position. The bad news is what they're talking about doing really is tightening the controls on the county executive, which in some cases may be good, some cases bad. The fear is that we could get a situation like Jefferson County. Notice in Jefferson County, they have a county health board, which even though Jefferson County has been a hotspot for COVID, the health board They passed a mask mandate, then called a special meeting to undo it. This would give the St. Louis County Council the power to do things like to override not just what Sam Page does, but also would undo things which his administration. For example, technically a mask mandate in St. Louis County is more a function of the county health department than the county executive. But it's the executive's power, it's the county's administrative power that allows that to happen. These bills would allow the county council to basically get involved in the day-to-day, get involved in decisions with the health department, with other state or other county agencies, which I'm a little bit worried about because it could mean that at a time when you need fast action and you need a strong hand on the rudder, especially in the first days of the pandemic, you could see a lot of second and third guessing. Not that Sam Page has done everything right, but you need to get things done. You don't need to put it on a debating society. And unfortunately, the county council has spent months sometimes on very basic issues. And this will do more of that.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yes, Harvey.
Yes, Glenn, regarding the shortfall on sales taxes, have you seen any analysis on what would happen if we charged or we collected sales tax on all internet sales?
Remember, Missouri has hundreds of millions of dollars available to it right now. If we simply enacted legislation or administratively accepted our share of the Wayfair federal lawsuit funds. Missouri, all we have to do is say, give us the money, or we could start out with close to $150 million a year probably from a lawsuit that's already been settled and that 48 other states are already collecting money from. So that would help. Missouri could also go and turn around and do some things that would allow it to collect more local sales taxes over the internet, require the internet salespeople to at least do down to the county level on apportioning sales tax. Right now, that's a huge problem. What's strange is that the Missouri Chamber of Commerce and Industry and other business groups want Missouri to collect that sales tax because it makes for a more level playing field for local merchants. And yet the Republican legislature has deemed accepting money people have already paid as a tax increase. And therefore they're dead set against it. They've had opportunities for several years now to bring it up or to simply turn the other way and let the treasurer accept the money, and they haven't done that. So yes, we're giving away money we need very badly for schools and roads and Medicaid.
Okay, anything else? Okay, all righty.
Glenn,
Yes, Susan.
how will this budget affect the schools?
Right now, the governor and the administration seem to be trying to support school funding as best they can. However, late in the fiscal year, if they get to a situation, as many of us expect, where they're facing hundreds of millions of dollars in shortfalls, there were some minor trims to school funding last fiscal year in the governor's cutbacks. It is very possible we could see more trims to the school funding. They've already hit transportation very hard. They could hit special services. There's a lot of little things they could hit. But if the revenue goes down, the schools are one of the largest sources of, or one of the largest consumers of general revenue. If general revenue goes down more than a little bit, it's hard to save the schools from cuts. The bad news is these things aren't going to happen through the budgeting process. It's going to be the governor excising his requirement that the state not go into the red, and it's going to be happening on short notice. So it's very possible, say in February or March, if we have a weak Christmas season with sales and if employment hasn't recovered and COVID comes back, we could see schools seeing their basic allocation of formula money getting chopped 5, 10, 15, 20%. And there's no way to stop that, and there's no way to predict it until it happens, unfortunately. Because by that time, they will have already cut so many other things than general revenue. Remember, general revenue, the biggest things going to general revenue are education and Medicaid. You can only trim so much from the little line items. You have to get into those big line items if you're looking at big shortfalls. And I think we could be looking at big shortfalls again.
Then I think they're going to cut teachers because they've already put 50 students in many of their classes because they're on Zoom. And I think they'll put more in those classes and either pay the teachers less or not have as many teachers.
Okay.
That's more of a local school district decision. And remember, in the St. Louis area, most of our districts get the vast majority of their money from local property tax. You go to outstate Missouri, and close to half the money is coming from Jefferson City. So the rural districts are much more vulnerable to state funding cuts than our local districts, but nobody can do without the money. But as bad as it would be in the St. Louis area, you could see situations in some of the rural districts, especially some of the rural districts in agricultural areas, because we don't do a very good job of taxing farmland based on real value. You could see situations where school districts are laying off teachers pretty quick if those state checks start getting smaller.
Glenn, do we still have a rainy day fund?
Yes and no. It's kind of a drizzly afternoon fund now. We've trimmed it back. We've taken money out of it several times. By law, they're supposed to get back to the $500 million level, I think, within the same fiscal year. But it's just not enough. And remember, Missouri's got a $30 billion a year budget. The rainy day fund's been averaging around $500 million. It helps, but it's not enough to get us through anything other than a little blip in the economy. It'll give us a couple of weeks of reserve. It doesn't give us a nice, comfortable seat to sit on.
Great.
Okay, well, moving right along. Do we have Leah? Is Leah on the call with us?
Yes, hello, good morning. I'm here.
Looking for you.
Go, Leah.
There you are.
Hello,
Leah.
Maureen. Hello.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Take it away.
Okay,
Tell us
well,
what we can do to assist.
Oh, so many things. Well, first of all, it's so good to see so many folks out here. My name is Leah. I'm the West County organizer with Show Me Change. We are the Democratic coordinated campaign this year. I know that some of the folks on here have already helped us out so far, which is awesome. I am here today because with 22 days left until Election Day, I really need all of the West County Dems to turn out for us and make sure that we can get all of our candidates elected. You know, the things that Glenn were talking about, you know, there are already schools in rural Missouri that can only afford 4 days a week of school. You know, Mike Parson took 100,000 kids off of Medicare. Like, this stuff is happening now, and we have to work to make sure that we don't leave anyone behind here in Missouri. And we are doing this by getting Nicole Galloway, getting Alicia Kennedy, all these other folks elected. And we have some really exciting opportunities that I need all of you to turn out for. I am really thrilled to see this many people on the call today. And, you know, one statistic that we have is every 20 calls that you would make for us is one more vote for Democrats this year. So, you know, if all of you turned up for 4 hours over the next 22 days, I'm terrible at math. I can't even do that math, but that's a lot of votes. So, you know, Nicole and Mike Parsons' race is literally neck and neck. I'm not sure if you all have seen, but it is within the margin of error. Like, it is close, and it's coming down to what's going to happen on the field here. So I really need you all to join us for these last couple of weeks. I'm going to throw in the chat our links to our events, as well as the date of the 4 most important days of our campaign. So that's our Get Out the Vote period, which is October 31st through November 3rd. So I'm going to throw that in the chat, as well as all of my contact information, as well as the links to sign up to make some calls, send some texts for us. They're all virtual, and I believe that is it. If there are any questions about what we've got going on, more about the coordinated campaign, I'd love to answer them, but I wanted to make this super quick.
Anybody have any questions for Leah? Oh, we have one down here.
Bobby here.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm wondering, how is it looking for our chances of breaking the supermajority of the legislature in Missouri so that they have to talk to us?
Yeah.
That's basically my...
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Nicole Galloway, if she wins, if she's handicapped by supermajority legislators.
Yeah, it doesn't mean much. Totally, totally. Well, we are working with every state house candidate this year across the state, and those races are looking really good. It's the same thing. It's going to be, we're not going to win in an overwhelming way. We're not going to take it back in these crazy margins where we have, it's going to be one seat that's going to put us over that edge. And that's why, like, having you guys volunteering with us will actually make a difference, which is really exciting. So that's a really good question. I don't have any hard facts on that right now, at least not off the top of my head. But I hope that answers that. And Mary, I see in the chat that you are going to make some calls for us on Thursday. That is awesome. I know that Kathy helped us out a couple weeks ago. Yeah.
Real good. You say, Leah, you're working with down ballot candidates too?
Yes. So we are a partnership with the Missouri Democrats, and then with the Missouri Democratic House Caucus, the MDHCC. So that's where we get our funding from. That's who pays my bills. So we are working with every single Democratic candidate this year. And I know that Terry, you had a question.
Yes, I'm having trouble getting Nicole Galloway yard signs. Where do we pick those up?
So we, I will throw that link in the chat. We have them at our office in Maryland Heights. We do have limited supplies of that, and yard signs don't talk. But you get on the phone call, and that's when we can win. But I will throw that information to get yard signs in the chat, but I know it's very limited.
I picked up signs from Harvey Ferdman, bless his heart, yesterday for all kinds of things. So I would say, first of all, get in touch with Harvey. His picture's on the line, but not him actually right now, as far as I know. But I got a lot of signs from him yesterday. So call Harvey first.
Thank you.
Do the townships still have yard signs? Kathy, do you know anything? Kathy Merrick, do you know about that?
In the meantime, I'll
Yes,
put my information in the
I do.
chat box. This is Harvey.
I do, as does Kathy Paulsmeyer, who I think is on this call. Kathy has them, and so contact Kathy at cpaulsmeyer@gmail.com, and she'll hook you up.
And this is Dennis Lavely for the Wild Horse Township. We still have both Galloway and Biden-Harris signs. And so I have them available. You can either email me at slccc96@aol.com, or I, in fact, have them out on my front porch where people can pick them up. So they are available there. And that address is 412 Still Creek Pass, Wildwood, Missouri, 63011.
Thank you, Dennis.
This is JL at Maryland Heights Township, along with Harvey. We still have a few signs left also.
Okay, Karen, I hate to, but I think we're over time. Are we about ready for program?
Yes, why don't we go ahead, and I will save the other two things for my closing remarks.
Thank you.
Is Tony with us?
Yes, And I would like to say before we go on, if you're feeling stressed as I am about this election, I know personally that if you sign up with Leah to do phoning, and if you go and get signs from Harvey or whoever and put them in your yard, you will not feel quite so helpless and frustrated, because I'm doing that and it's making me feel better. Okay, now moving on to program. Tony has joined with us, and thank you, Tony, for your patience in waiting. Mr. Messenger spoke to us just after he received his Pulitzer a little over a year ago, and he's graciously agreed to come today. He's the winner of the 2019 Pulitzer Prize for commentary. It was awarded for his searing series of columns, which exposed the malfeasance and injustice of forcing poor Missourians charged with misdemeanor crimes to pay unaffordable fines or be sent to jail. I didn't even know this could happen till he wrote those articles. A cycle of debt and criminalization often results and becomes impossible to escape from. He and Kevin Horrigan, another well-known name around St. Louis, had been nominated for one in 2015 for their editorials and insights related to the tragedy of Ferguson. He's the Metro columnist at the Post-Dispatch and spoke to us in the past. He lives in Wildwood with his family and brings a unique perspective to us in St. Louis. So I'd like to turn it over and welcome him now, Mr. Messenger.
Thanks, Elaine. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I know that there's...
could you increase the volume? We're having trouble hearing you, sir.
I don't know that I can.
Maybe Mark?
Let me see what I have here.
Okay. Have you got the volume all the way up on the computer?
Yeah, I'm looking to see if I've got another place for volume right now.
Okay. Okay, testing.
Can you hear me?
Better. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. There we go. Yeah, I can't see another place to increase volume, but thank you all for having me. Does this help if I hold the mic up here a little bit, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to do that a little bit. So a lot has changed since the last time I spoke to this group, and almost all of it related to the election and this awful coronavirus pandemic that we're all dealing with. Some of us by no longer going to the office and spending our days on Zoom, talking to our friends and colleagues and other people. And I'm sure if you're like me, it's driving you a little bit crazy. One of the things that has happened that I think is sad for the nation, but good for the election, is that there is no longer any ability by either the president or the governor or any of the incumbents in various states to try to say that this election is about anything other than COVID. It has completely gripped the nation in a painful way. We're well over 200,000 deaths now. We are here in Missouri continuing to rise, continuing to have data problems. And now we're seeing a lot of the rise in rural Missouri, which really highlights our other major healthcare problem that we've been dealing with in this state, the failure to expand Medicaid, which absolutely is increasing the potential for COVID-19 deaths in rural Missouri, because they just don't have the rural hospital capacity to deal with regular situations, let alone a pandemic. So this is the COVID election. And one of the things that COVID has done in a variety of different ways is sort of magnified or clarified existing problems that we have in our society. So I sort of use this metaphor to talk about it. When I drink a little bit, have a couple of beers at happy hour, I like to think that I am a happy drunk. When I have had 1 or 2 beers, I am very funny and very smart. Everything I say, of course, is smart all the time. And those of you who read my column, of course, think that, wow, he's very smart all the time. But when I've had a couple of beers, I am really smart and really funny. Not everybody's that way. We all probably have an uncle in the family who is the mean drunk. And we've sadly, you know, some of us have had to deal with that in terms of alcoholism and drug abuse in our family. But in that way, COVID has clarified who we are as a nation. When you look at what has happened, what we are learning all across the nation because of COVID, any of the deficiencies that all of us, whether we're Democrats, Republicans, or independents, have recognized in President Trump's failures have absolutely been magnified because of his inability to deal with this damaging and deadly pandemic. In the same way, when we look at areas in our community in St. Louis and throughout the nation where COVID is having the worst effect, there is a disparity gap, much like there is in education, much like there is in healthcare. COVID is attacking people of color. If you go back and remember those initial days of COVID here in St. Louis, the first 12 or so deaths were all Black people in the city of St. Louis. And that's for a variety of reasons. It's because we don't invest our healthcare dollars in those communities. It's because we depend on people living in poverty, who in our community are often Black people, to do the sorts of jobs that other people are not doing, that they can't take off and work from home in a basement like I am, and continue to put themselves in danger for, unfortunately, getting COVID-19. And so one of the silver linings, and it's hard to look at it as a silver lining if you know people who have been infected and died from this awful virus, but what should be a silver lining in terms of both our short term, in terms of what happens on November 3rd, and our long term as our nation starts to look to recover from the pandemic and get beyond the pandemic, is that we recognize the inherent failures of a society when we are not investing in communities where poverty is rampant, because that is affecting where the pandemic is hurting us the most. And it is allowing us during this unique time in American history, where we're also going through a revival of the long civil rights debate and crusade and arc towards justice that is not yet close enough to justice. We're recognizing that we have a problem as a country, that we continue to have institutional and systemic racism in many of our institutions, in our cities, in our states, and in our nation. And if we don't address that outside of the pandemic, but using the pandemic as an opportunity for us to recognize our inherent divisions, then shame on us. The pandemic has clarified, COVID has clarified who we are as a nation, who we have been as a nation, and what we must do to get beyond that. And in a strange way, the election and COVID coming together have clarified, even within our small communities, little things that we can do to try to make our society a little bit better. So some of you may have read a column that I wrote a month or so ago, and I want to talk about it because to me it was just so clarifying of so many of the nation's problems that we have sort of coming together in one explosive little situation. So a couple of months ago, I wrote a column about some neighbors of mine. Some neighbors of mine are both educators. They have 3 girls. One of their daughters went to elementary school with one of my daughters. And like so many of us who are parents, They want nothing more than their kids to be able to go back to school in person. I don't know anybody who doesn't want that for their children. The debate is over what is safe and what is better for our teachers and our people who work in the schools, social workers and secretaries like my wife and other people, and what happens if we send all of our children back to school. But everybody seems to want their children to get back to school. So a local group in the Rockwood School set up a Facebook page trying to encourage folks to advocate for 5 days back in school. And my neighbors, my friends, decided to get on the page, and they shared information about their kids and how they wanted them to get back to school. But they quickly noticed something about the page. And this says something about COVID. It says something about Facebook. It says something about West County. It says something about communication in the age of Trump. The page quickly began to morph into something that was more of a pro-Trump, anti-Sam page, anti-information sharing situation. And it was really discouraging to these friends of mine who live in the community, who are active in the community, whose kids want to go to school, who share a bond with the other people on the Facebook page that they want their kids to go to school. So my friends decided to do a little bit of a social experiment. The husband, who's a little bit quirky, decided that he would just share all sorts of wacky information on the Facebook page. Whatever he came across that was some made up study somewhere about how masks weren't really a big deal, and he would like the most bizarre sorts of comments that people would make and share bizarre information. And his wife decided instead to just share scientific information as politely and nicely as she could. If she disagreed with somebody, she said, "Hey, I wonder if you might look at it from this perspective, and here's some more information that sort of explains why maybe it's not safe yet, but if we all wear masks, it might be safer sooner." And guess what happened? The woman got kicked out of the Facebook group. That's where we are as a society right now. We don't want to hear from people who think differently than us. And those of us who, like many of the people on this call, live in West County, know that dealing with that is sometimes difficult. That sometimes our neighbors want to keep their politics to themselves, and those who are very much in their face about whatever their particular brand of politics is, sometimes if they hear information from a neighbor, from a fellow parent of a child at school, they don't always want to listen to it. And instead we go into our little bubbles and we share, unfortunately, on Facebook and other places, really misinformation that damages our democracy and damages our society and makes it harder for us to get to where we need to be. And unfortunately, right now, we're seeing a lot of that, where these voices that are really loud and pressuring our politicians to try to make quick decisions rather than safe decisions as it relates to dealing with this ongoing and in some places rising pandemic, it can be really depressing. The one thing that helps get us out of that is we have this election coming up on November 3rd, and we have an opportunity to make our voices heard, or if, like me, you were able to vote absentee, I've already voted and made my voice heard in the election. I believe this is the COVID election, and I believe we'll find out on November 4th, which hopefully will be a happy birthday for me, that people voted based on what's going on in the pandemic, and that we will have used this pandemic for a little bit of a silver lining to bring some focus back to the society that we could have, that we'd like to have, where all of us can share our views with folks who sometimes disagree with us, and do so in a way where we're educating each other and we're learning from each other, instead of just blocking each other out and refusing to have those sorts of difficult conversations. One of the things that I love about living where I live is about once every 3 or 4 weekends, I drive by the intersection of Clayton and Clarkson, and there are a group of Democrats out there, sometimes small, sometimes fairly large, sharing their views in West County. I've never considered myself a Democrat. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I have been an independent my entire life. I grew up in Colorado, where sort of had this independent Western philosophy. And most of my life, I have had a very split ticket in terms of voting. The age of Trump has mostly changed that for me. But I look forward to a time in our society where, once again, the idea of Democrats standing on a corner in deep red West County doesn't seem so odd, because we don't always know what the politics of our neighbors are, what the people that we go to school with, the people that we sit in the stands at a basketball or football or baseball game while our kids are playing. We don't always know what their politics are. We're there to root for our kids. And when we have a situation like we have right now, where sadly, even in dealing with an unbelievable historic pandemic, we turn everything into politics. All of a sudden, wearing a face mask is a political statement, and it shouldn't be. It's a health statement. It's a statement that says, I have a social contract in our society. I care about my fellow man and woman, and I want to protect them as much as I want to protect my family. It's amazing to me that somehow something so simple has been bastardized by the right and turned into something that it isn't, a political statement. It was never intended to be a political statement. It was always intended to just be a simple statement of health, a simple statement of I care about the society around us. So hopefully, come November 3rd, those of us who recognize that this is the COVID election, this is the election in which we decide whether or not we as a society want people in charge of our government who can bring us together when we face difficult attacks on our nation, be they a virus or be they terrorism. It's interesting, I wrote a column very early on as COVID started, comparing this time to September 11th. And sadly, my fear when I wrote the column, I think in March, came true. We no longer have the ability as a nation right now, under our current leadership, to come together when we face a common enemy. And we need an election and perhaps several election cycles to get us back to that point where we can face a common enemy, whether we are Democrats or Republicans, far left Democrats or centrist Democrats, Green Party or Libertarian. We ought to be able to, as a nation, face a common foe together, find that common ground, that we both have children going to the same school and we want to create a healthy community so that they can get back to school. That ought to be an opportunity for common ground. And instead, right now, in the age of COVID, in the age of Trump, it is an opportunity for more division rather than an opportunity for unity. I hope the next time I come speak to you, we're talking about the lessons that we've learned from COVID-19 and from this historic election. And we can move on to talking about some important policy fixes that will take a bipartisan effort in the Missouri legislature, like what Glenn was talking about earlier with school financing. If you're interested in that topic, by the way, please take a look at my column in this morning's Post-Dispatch and follow online to the link of the Forward Through Ferguson report. The latest report from that organization is about school financing and how it, combined with our divisions of 24 school districts in one county, create a situation in which it contributes to the disparity gap between black and white that has long existed, going back to the 60s, and continues to exist in part because of the way the system is structured. And Glenn made a point that I didn't highlight enough in the column that's really important, and that is that the same disparity gap that exists in funding between poor districts and wealthy districts in St. Louis exists in rural Missouri as well. And that's where an opportunity exists. There is an opportunity, and we've seen that in Medicaid expansion. We've seen it in the right to work vote. We've seen it in the Clean Missouri vote. There is an opportunity in Missouri for liberal Democrats in the city, for black people in the city and the county, and for rural white Republicans to work together on issues of common ground. We've seen that multiple times in the last few years in Missouri, and sadly, our overwhelmingly Republican legislature continues to not recognize that ability to reach common ground. This may well be the election that pushes that forward, because even though I suspect that there will still be a large Republican majority in the legislature following November 3rd, if voters successfully beat back Amendment 3, then the next redistricting cycle and the one after that will bring a little bit more sanity to the system. And whether Republicans are in charge or Democrats are in charge, it will force a situation in which they actually have to talk to each other again. And that's frankly what I hope we learn from this COVID situation more than anything else, is that we don't get anywhere as a nation if we don't talk to each other. The idea that only Republicans have the answer or only Democrats have the answer has never been right in this nation's history in terms of bringing a solution forward. All of the best solutions in the history of this nation have been when we actually talk to each other across party lines, across ideological lines, across racial lines. And I hope that is the lesson that we learned from this COVID election. I'm going to go ahead and stop there, and I'd love to take some questions if we've got a way to go through that process, Elaine.
Okay, I'm going to turn that over to Mark or Karen to handle that, please.
Okay. We can put them in the chat box if you have any questions for Tony. If I can get my chat box to open, that would be helpful.
I've got my chat box open, so hopefully that will work.
You see any questions for you, Tony?
I don't yet.
Yeah.
Old school. Anybody have a, oh, here we go.
Mine acted up.
I shared your Twitter handle. You're one of my favorite follows on Twitter. Okay, we have a question for you. Oh, and a comment, very thoughtful analysis. I always read your stuff either in the paper itself or on Twitter. Here's a question for you, Tony. What do you think about the county council bills to put time limits on health guidelines?
I don't like them. And the reason is there is a reason why we have always, well, maybe not always, but at least going back to 1918 with the Spanish flu, we have had laws in our cities, in our counties, in our states, and in our nation that allow our public health officials to make very specific decisions that protect our health during a public health crisis. I don't think we want to get away from that and be making political decisions about public health. It is, you know, one of the most laughable things to me about the county council primary, or the county executive primary, and it'll probably be, you know, it's going on a little bit in the general election, although I don't think too many people take Paul very seriously, is this idea that somehow Sam Page was closing things down to benefit him politically. I spend a lot of time in the youth sports world because my kids play a variety of sports. And trust me when I tell you, Sam Page making the decisions that he did to protect our health didn't earn him any votes. Those were difficult decisions, and we want our government to make those sorts of decisions in a pandemic health crisis, not just simply allow it to the political whims of the time. So those aren't easy decisions, and I don't know that either our county executive or Mayor Lyda Cruzan made the best decisions all the time. I definitely don't think Governor Parson did. But I want our governor, for instance, to have the ability to put a mask mandate in effect if we had a governor who was willing to do that, like so many of the other governors around the nation. So I don't think there should be a time limit on common sense during a public health pandemic.
Okay, have another question here. How do we deal with the militia after the election? There's this discussion about, I spoke with a neighbor this morning, and she said that apparently her brother is coming to visit after the election and is coming armed. Like,
yeah, that's, you know, within families that's difficult.
Armed, yeah, or 60-year-olds.
I have had to deal with that as a I have family members who have different beliefs about guns than I do. And I have had to ask family members not to bring their weapons to my house. And that's not an easy discussion to have, but it's one that I encourage people to have within their family if they want to protect their children. But so I wrote a column a couple of years ago. I've actually written a version of it a couple different times, and I'm thinking of reviving it again. Several years ago, Missouri has a what they call a fusion center. It is almost every state has them. Some cities and counties have them. It is a place in which law enforcement combines its resources to study extremists, to protect us from terrorists. And all of the studies of these various fusion centers that exist across the nation have the same analysis, and that is that what we should fear more than anything else are the terrorists among us, the right-wing, white supremacist terrorists who refer to themselves falsely as militias. They are terrorists, and they are scary. And one of the problems that we have as a society is that politically, several years ago, I'm going to forget the time, I believe it was around 2009, the Fusion Center put out its annual report. And amongst the different extremists that it pointed to in Missouri were lots of groups that were pushing anti-Semitism, groups that were pushing lots of white supremacist ideas. It pointed to groups that had adopted the "Don't Tread on Me" flag. And this was around the time of the rise of the Tea Party. And a lot of the Tea Party folks had adopted the "Don't Tread on Me" flag. So Republicans at the time in Missouri pointed to that and said, this is a horrible report. It's biased. It's liberal. It's Governor Nixon was the governor at the time, but he didn't have anything to do with this Fusion Center report. It was a law enforcement report. And it predicted all of the things that we're seeing right now. It predicted what's happening in Michigan. It predicted what happened in Wisconsin. It predicted what we've seen happen with our own homegrown racists here in Missouri, in which we've had multiple examples in the last few years of anti-Semites and white supremacists either killing Jews or targeting Jews and other people of color. And so it is absolutely a massive problem, and it has been made worse by Donald Trump's presidency. And so what really has to happen is that these fusion centers, these law enforcement agencies that have been publicizing this, need to go back to doing that, need to go back to telling the nation, this is what we fear. These are the folks that we have to investigate. And yes, we have to go into those organizations and break them up and arrest them and take away their illegal weapons. It is a problem facing the nation, and I think we're going to have to address it. I fear some of the violence that could be coming, no matter which way the election goes, because of these militia groups, and it's a problem. But here in Missouri, we knew who they were, and we were following them, and we were telling the citizens of Missouri about them so that they could be aware, so that they could be paying attention, and then we stopped purely because of politics.
Okay, I have another question. Your column today focused on school per pupil funding. Does money determine school quality?
No, I don't think money determines school quality, but it matters. Jay Nixon used to say that a budget is a moral document, that budgets determine what we care about and what our priorities are. And I think that is true. And the biggest problem that I see with school funding is that by basing it on property tax and building it the way we do, and having completely divided school districts partially by race, in some cases on purpose, in some cases accidentally, throughout St. Louis, we create a disparity that makes it significantly more difficult for us to improve the quality of all of our school districts. And I look at it this way. I'm in the Rockwood schools, and my kids get Chromebooks, and every high school has a fancy new artificial turf football stadium. And the same is not true. The same is not true of school districts in Normandy and Riverview Gardens in the city of St. Louis. And part of that is funding. Part of that is because we have hoarded our wealth in a way in which people who live where I live are not invested in the success of school districts outside of our school district. And I think we should be. I think we would care more about test scores in Normandy and Riverview Gardens and University City and Pattonville and the city of St. Louis if we were invested in the success of those schools. And right now we are not. So that's why I, for years, have railed against this division that we have by having 24 school districts in St. Louis County. I'd like to see us have one school district in the city of St. Louis and St. Louis County. And we have an example of how that works, the special school district. The special school district gets wonderful marks for the work that it does in almost all of the school districts in St. Louis County dealing with children with special needs. I don't know why we don't take that model and adopt it countywide. I believe that would make a difference.
I have another question here for you. Oops, and it scrolled away. Have you received any feedback from rural readers, goodness, that's hard to say, about your columns on the problems in Ferguson and other racial issues? I think I can probably know the answer to that one.
You know, one of the fascinating things about my Debtor's Prison series was how much support I got from readers who traditionally don't like what I have to say. They would frequently email me and say, I normally think you're a XYZ, But I really think you've hit the nail on the head, because they understood rural poverty. And that's what I was writing about. Where the conversations get difficult with those folks is when I explain to them, as I have in multiple columns, that the problems in rural law enforcement as it relates to putting poor people in jail are a mirror image of the problems that we identified in Ferguson, which was primarily about the criminalization of Black people who were living in poverty. The problems are very similar. They're more about poverty and using our criminal justice system as a fundraising tool, as a taxing tool, than they are about Black and white. But it's amazing the power of racism, because when I make that comparison, I lose some of the readers who get it when I'm writing about debtor's prison, about white poor people in debtor's prison in Salem or St. Francis County or in Caldwell County. But when I write about an effort that very much affects Black people, and I include the phrase Black Lives Matter, they're just turned off. And it continues to remind me that we have a fundamental racial problem in this country that we haven't dealt with yet. I'm writing a book on that sort of started with those series of columns and is expanded to talk about the criminalization of poverty nationwide. And that is a big theme of the book, is connecting what we see in urban areas to what we see in rural areas, connecting Black and white, and trying to help explain to people that if we get beyond our racism, we can see that the criminalization of poverty is hurting us in big cities and in rural areas all over the country.
Okay, here's another question. Do you think the increased militancy of these right-wing extremist groups would have happened in the absence of COVID?
Well, I think it was already happening, and it was being encouraged by the president. I mean, if you look at the Anti-Defamation League reports going back 2 or 3 years, they've been identifying the rise of extremism going back to 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. So much of this was fueled by the president. When the president of the United States gives permission to racists to be openly racist and almost encourages it, and you add guns to that, it's really dangerous. It's a recipe for disaster. And so I think it was happening before COVID. I think COVID probably contributed to it even more, unfortunately, because we're so isolated in a different way than we have been, and because we've lost our ability as a nation to do multiple things at multiple times. And so, yeah, I think COVID's made it worse, but the extremism that we have in our nation has been rising for the last several years, and even before Trump. But I think very much the president encouraged that. And you go back to what we saw in Charlottesville, and then you connect that to Kyle Rittenhouse in Wisconsin, and the fact that we actually have Republican gatherings in which this white kid who crossed the state lines to go kill himself some protesters is being encouraged and is being welcomed and is being cheered. And it's terribly depressing that that's happening right now, but that's our reality, and it is going to take us a while to recover from this.
You know, Karen, I was just thinking, if I may interject here, year before last, one of my book clubs read Madeleine Albright's book, Fascism. And when you think about before COVID, before all these other things, Madeleine Albright, whose family lived through some of that, wrote a really interesting book. And another one was Michael Liss's book, The Fifth Risk, predicting what could happen in an emergency if you didn't have a government with good leadership among the different departments. And I just wondered if Tony would, play off of two of those concepts.
Well, I mean, I think that's why elections are so important. we have to have leaders that through their words and through their actions make it clear that extremism and racism is just not going to be allowed in this country, and that they have the ability and the eloquence to bring people together against that common enemy. I mean, that's one of the things that I've been impressed with Joe Biden about. He was not my favorite Democrat in the Democratic primary, but he has proven, I think, to be the voice for the right time in terms of just the empathy that he has as a human being, and his ability to talk about unity in a way that I think really resonates with people. We'll see what happens on November 3rd, how much that's resonating, but to me, that's been one of the most important things about his message, is that he just really focuses on trying to bring people together. And so having a voice in the White House of whatever party that can do that, I think is something that this nation really needs right now. And we need it for 2 or 3 or 4 election cycles in a row, because the extremism that we're seeing in the United States is not isolated. It's happening again in Europe. It's happening in Germany. It's happening in multiple different places. And it's just destabilizing for both national and worldwide peace.
Okay, I have one more question here that to be respectful of Tony's time. One more question I wonder as what you envision as happening with the process for counting ballots and the election results being handled. Not necessarily your worst case scenario, but what do you think is a realistic expectation as to what's going to happen in November? Excuse me.
Well, I think there's a realistic expectation that we're not going to know the result of every election, of every race on the night of November 3rd. You know, my biggest hope for the nation is that the presidential race is not close at all, so that particular race is not the one we're worried about as it relates to counting votes for days or weeks. Because if we can get that race out of the way, it sort of tamps everything down in terms of dealing with the lawsuits and the lawyers from both parties watching the counting of the ballots and all of that. But I think, you know, you look at Missouri, historically, our last couple of elections, not as much, but historically, the races atop our ballot during a presidential year are really close and very much influenced by the top of the ticket. And this year is definitely not going to be a repeat of 2016, where the top of the Republican ticket carries a governor candidate, Eric Greitens, who came from nowhere and all of a sudden won. I don't know if Joe Biden will do well enough in Missouri to be able to help bring Nicole Galloway along with him, as well as the races underneath. But I do think that presidential race will have a significant effect on all of the statewide races below. And I think some of them are going to be close. So I think the likelihood is there will be lots of legal challenges in lots of states in this country related to gubernatorial races, related to House races, related to amendments and all of those sorts of things, because there's just such an appetite right now, particularly amongst Republicans to suppress votes and to challenge votes and to criticize mail-in ballots. And here in Missouri, we have had such confusion over the difference between mail-in and absentee and what's going to be allowed. And we still have ongoing legal challenges related to that. So I think the reality is come November 4th, we're not going to know all the answers. My best case scenario is we know that one answer, the presidential race, and that it's a clear answer, because then it tamps down some of the emotion as it relates to the rest of the races, I think. And that will be good for our democracy to get through this as quickly as we can.
Okay, well, we want to thank you again, Tony, for speaking with us today. It was very, very helpful, very enlightening. I've shared your Twitter handle in the chat box. I just had a couple of closing remarks. If you haven't paid your dues for the year 2021, please go to the website later and find the post office box to which to refer that. I, again, know I'm preaching to the choir. If you haven't yet made a plan to vote, please do so. If you need assistance in voting, please feel free to reach out to me. I can help you somewhat. I'm a little informed with the process, except for the fact I told a voter Saturday morning what had been decided in court on Friday had taken place, and then it was countermanded later in the day on Saturday. So get your ballots in one way or another. We have a couple other bookkeeping things. Our nominating committee is looking for folks who would like to serve on the executive board. We are in need of a co-chair to take Suzanne's place. We are in need of a secretary and 2 board directors. So if any of you would like to nominate somebody, you may send those names to me or Suzanne. And because we need to begin the process of installing our officers for next year. And lastly, the Joanne Fox Hughes Award. If you have anybody you would like to nominate for it, please send those nominations to Suzanne. And go vote. Anything you can do in the next 22 days to further our cause, please do so. Remain safe, wear your mask. We're the science believers, remember that. And hope to see you on November 9th. Hopefully some things will have shaken out by then. The big one especially when Dr. Terry Jones will be our speaker. That's November 9th. Thank you. Have an excellent day. Have a nice October. Take care.